All right. Well, it has been a minute or two, hasn't it? Uh, it's been a while since I've been able to stream. I think it's been like 3 weeks. And probably well over 2 years since I've tried to do a video project of this nature. But here we are today with the release version, the hot fix patched version of Distant Worlds 2. The hot fix, of course, they released just a couple days after the game dropped. Um, and this will be a one of those let's play, let's review type experiences where it's not really a walkthrough, it's more maybe a tour of the game and what it offers and what actually playing it is like. Um, so sit back and enjoy all the evaluation and gameplay to be had. As I continue to edit and improve the quality of this video, hopefully at some point there will be chapter marks that you can see at the bottom of the screen, or of the the what do you call it, the timeline, that will let you know where you can skip around to see certain parts of the game. As I am kind of recording this, I don't have a script, but I do have certain things I want to highlight, and I'll put the timestamps and the little chapter marks in the video for you to follow easily and skip around and peruse. Okay, but with all that being said, let's go ahead and actually get this puppy started. This is Distant Worlds 2, a real-time strategy and a 4X strategy mashup game. Honestly, the predecessor, Distant Worlds Universe, is probably one of the contenders for one of the best 4X strategy games of all time. Right there with Mu 2 and Civilization series. Distant Worlds Universe was pretty much an indie developer triumph. Um, it definitely showed all of its indie development uh, quirks, but at the same time, the gameplay was very compelling for many people, and the depths and variety of strategy was just amazing. So now the developers with the more resources and with a firm backing of Slytherin as a publisher have created a sequel that is now in fully 3D and in a more modern rendering style here. Speaking of which, you can kind of see pulsing on my screen is the star pattern here. I've never actually seen this before. The stars kind of jittering around like that, so um, there we go. There's our first evaluative comment, right? Kind of distracting there. I'm pretty certain it has to do with some kind of a focal point, because what you'll notice throughout the game, and this is very well done actually, it just happens to be kind of freaking out in front of us at the moment, is that the rendering going from the full galaxy map down to an individual ship, and even going into a third person over the shoulder view of your ships is all very smooth, and the detail on the models is wonderful. So, but yeah, I think it's kind of wigging out a little bit here. Before we move on, let's go ahead and do the thing that you should always do when you start reviewing a game or you just freshly download a new game, um, is that you should look at the game settings. So these are the settings. There's some general settings here. Rotate camera button. Okay, that's a good one. There's an option here that I wanted you to look at, and one of those options is that by default, mouse click drag function has moves main view as its default behavior. If you play a lot of RTS games, as I do, um, that's kind of not useful. So they do have an option for selecting ships in main view. In other words, you can bandbox them easier. with this, make it more like a real RTS game. So I would recommend flipping that over. But then everything else is pretty standard. You can manipulate auto saves and stuff. There is changing key mappings. You always want to see that on a modern game. Also, they have this little error thing where if you're trying to drag around a window, it looks like it gives you an error. I have very imprecise movements with my mouse, so I'll probably, throughout my playthrough here, be triggering that. Um, okay. Anyway, that's really it for the options, though, and I'm not sure how I feel about that. Your display options are very rudimentary. You can choose your graphics adapter if you have more than one. So again, if you have a integrated chip and a dedicated GPU, you probably will have to go through the rigmarole of identifying the renderer. Um, and then of course here are my settings here. That's it. There's no like glare or bloom or model detail or anything like that. Like this is however it looks is however it looks, I guess. Um, and that's it. Some people have, I'm just going to address it right now because it is playing in the background. Some people don't really care for the music soundtrack that comes with the game. Because I do want to capture the experience of playing the game as a real player, I'm going to leave the music on and you can evaluate that yourself. I'll be honest, the background music in the game for me becomes background music. It's something that you're not really focused on. That being said, I guess we've been spoiled a little bit lately with some great soundtracks in the 4X universe. Humankind had a great soundtrack. Uh, and of course we have great soundtracks in, games like Skyrim and Total Annihilation and Supreme Commander and those are things that you could unironically listen to. um, and get enjoyment from. Uh, Definitely, this soundtrack is not to that quality. Now, whether or not you hate it or not, again, it's going to be kind of subjective, I think. I won't give it in my personal view, I don't give it a ding for the music, but, it's background music. It's there in the background, and it's doing its thing. But we'll leave it on. So, again, if you don't like it, well, that's that. Graphical style, good. Nice main menu. Um, Again, graphical settings could use a little tweaking, I guess, a little more exposure for people with lower end systems. But then again, the scaling is pretty good, so it's possible that you can probably play this game on a fairly low end PC anyway. You just scroll out until it's, sprites. Speaking of that, let's go ahead and start a new game. Now, I actually have a game loaded up with all my options, so we'll just kind of quickly breeze through here, but you've got lots of options to set up a new game. Different galaxy types, more galaxy types than there were in the original. Although some of the other options have been streamlined or simplified or simply aren't available as they were in Distant Worlds universe, if that's your point of comparison. But if you've played things like Stellaris, or Civilization Beyond Earth, or any of those other space-based 4X games, Amplitude Studios games, this is going to be about on par with that. So it's not unusually, but Distant Worlds universe, the original, kind of had a few more options, but not on this screen though. Anyway, we can have 300, 500, 700, up to 2,000 stars. You also get to decide the galaxy size. So it's possible you can create a lot of stars here and then just cram them in a small area. But I've decided to kind of go for the smallest of each kind. I also went with the classic galaxy because that's the kind of galaxy that was default in Distant Worlds universe. And I was kind of curious how the various other changes in the game affected the Distant Worlds universe feel. Spiral Galaxy is the suggested default, by the way, for this, but the game I created has the classic galaxy shape. So, that being said, all these other options are in fact the default. So moving on, again, all of these are default. Except for the research visibility. So they do have this thing where they randomize researches and also obscure the researches. In the original game, you could see the entire tech tree, including unique techs for each race, just, from the beginning of the game. And you can kind of plot your strategy that way. They've kind of gone the sort of the stars route now, where they have this option where you can obscure your path and also randomize just a little bit what texts lead to what. So, for example, it's possible in one game I was playing for a little bit during the preview period. I had these options on, and I noticed that, for example, I was going down the beam weapon path, and I realized that I had to unlock the long range beam, the Shatter Force, laser beam. This is the next tier weapon after the beginner weapon. Before I could upgrade the beginner weapon. So in other words, I would be researching a new weapon type, or rather, kind of an innovative as opposed to an innovative weapon type, or iterative. Sorry, innovative weapon type as opposed to an iterative weapon type, and the bonus for the weapons that I was researching was behind the new weapon. Um, so it wasn't really that random. I mean, beam weapons stay in beam weapons, and missiles stay with missiles, but sometimes it does kind of shake up the order and what your empire is able to do. I In a game like this, I find that a bit irritating. Sword of the Stars pulls it off great, um, but it didn't really work for me when I was playing with that. So my personal preference is that I'm going to have that. Besides that, I also want to just show you what the full tech tree looks like. So I've gone ahead and I've turned on visibility and also made the research paths be fixed so that we can kind of see how the developers kind of intend for things to go without... I guess they intend for it to be like this because this is the default, but see how they feel like the tech tree should be. Okay, these threats, again, are all very default for this playthrough, so not much to say there. A nice welcome change is that pirates respawning is now stay dead as a default. I had many an abortive game in Distant Worlds universe over the years where I would forget to tick the box that made them stay dead, and I would just get so irritated that I killed this faction, gosh darn it. And they kept coming back. I did change the colony prevalence from normal to abundant. Again, I did play a couple games in the preview period, and I just wasn't really finding worlds, even when I would research the text that would give you bonuses to the planet quality, so that your species would have an easier time settling worlds of a certain type. I still wasn't finding a lot that would be habitable or desirable for my species to have, regardless of what species I was playing. We only had 2 species during the preview period, but I still struggled. So I've gone ahead and put that up abundant, but everything else is default. I'm playing as the humans. They are a good all-rounder, it looks like. And their infantry, if we click around here, their infantry is, it's the only thing that you really get from them. Each race has its own unique infantry base type. And we're kind of in the middle of the road. Very typical tropey humans in a 4X video game. We're the middle of the road species. And so that's what you would expect. Bonuses. So we get a lot of research bonuses, and these preferred government types. By the way, there was a question on Reddit, their subreddit, like what does this mean here? Well, it basically just means that these 2 government types synergize really well with the racial traits that you get when you pick your race. And that's it. There's no special super bonus for picking a preferred government type. So whether or not you want to be a human with a military dictatorship, that's fine. But again, generally, this is just general strategy game tips here. Is that generally you want to make your strength stronger, as opposed to try to cover up weaknesses with bonuses. So what the governments here are just basically, they give you additional modifiers to your race. I would not, this is my style. I would not choose a race that had lots of negatives and then try to pick a government type that's not recommended for them. because all that will do is make a bunch of things mediocre at best, as opposed to playing to that race's strengths. And so they kind of help you out here by saying, here are the two government types that would really, you know, add to your ability to play this race the way we kind of intend to play it. So there you go. Um, and then I named myself the Terran Republic of Seoul. Um, and I gave myself the Republic government type. And then I actually did change the flag. Not sure why I didn't save, but I changed the flag there. We're going to start on an excellent home system. We're going to have, only one world, pre-warp, random starting location. Um, and then I went ahead, and because we're small, I've only added the other 6 unique races in the game. I've named them something so that I know when I come across them, because there will be continuing to be colonies, independent colonies that spawn, and they could become major empires. So if they have a name that does not like reference their species, basically, we know that's a new emerging power as opposed to one of the ones that started the game. I did, give the AI the same starting conditions that I have. Pre-warp tech, only one planet, and they start in an excellent home system. And then, of course, the victory conditions are default. We're not going to go ahead and start this game, though. I already have one that's kind of underway. Not really. I paused it on the first day, did a bunch of stuff so I wouldn't have to do it on camera, and then and then started. So let's go ahead and start that game. Okay, load it up. The loading screens are pretty good. I mean, you'll only ever see it the one time because it's a totally fluid game. There's no other loading, but thankfully, not like Total War, where you go from loading screen to loading screen. It's a loading screen punctuated by a turn-based campaign and an occasional battle, and you're mostly looking at loading screens. This game is not like that at all. It loads up once, and then you're good to go. All right, so this is our galaxy. Have it obviously. This is actually the first day, so we start the game in 2754, January 2nd. Um, for reference, this is one of those random things that I noticed that was a difference between the two games. From between this and the original is that in the original you start on like January 6th, 2200, like 550 years earlier. So not sure why they changed that. Maybe it's important to the story of this game. Who knows? I haven't actually been able to complete an entire species story all the way to victory yet, so um, we'll just have to see. So some of the things that I did here is that they've redone the population mechanic from the original game. So it used to be like when you spawn on a single world, you would go through the ship designs and make them as cheap as possible in terms of maintenance cost. You would deliberately not tax your home world with the intent of getting the population to explode. That mechanic has been totally reworked. That is no longer a good idea at all. Um, because if you go over here to our budget, we actually grow our colony. Colony growth is actually linked to our money now. Now, after playing around with this for a while, I realized that there's basically no way I can get, even with maximum tax levels, I can't achieve as you can see by the tooltip here, maximum colony growth usable amount is 2,000. You can't get that amount right off the bat. So I have decided that for whatever it is worth, because I do still believe it helps your private economy get off the ground a little bit, especially since in this game, you are forced to have limited ship sizes, where certain things have to be more efficient and therefore expensive. In other words, you can't kind of get away with increasing your ship size and then picking all the basic components and just having loads of basic cheap components. As you could in Distant Worlds Universe, you can't really do that anymore. We'll look at ship design here in a second. But long story short, you're just going to have to eat some costs in terms of your ships, and so will the private sector. So it's best that you give them some money to play around with by not taxing them that much. But at the same time, you do want to you don't want to do that thing where you periodically lower your taxes to zero to get some better growth in your colonies, because it just doesn't work that way anymore. So you want to spend however much money you can on colony growth. And of course, to do that, you need tax revenue. Okay, so that's a big, major change there, at least for the beginning of the game. As the game continues, probably not. The other thing I would want to point out here is that you do have, if you have this, Empire tab here, everything's divided into tabs, which is just fantastic. I didn't mind the toolbar that they had. The fact that everything looked like a mid 2000s website made things clunky. And this is very slick and modern here. But anyway, in this Empire tab, we do have Empire policy settings, and they do have a preset configuration. Now, I've dabbled with this, and what I did was I actually put my preset to, off. Everything's off, no automation, and then I turned on the things that I needed, and mostly that just meant turning on suggestions. I'm fairly familiar with Distant Worlds universe. Like I said, I have been streaming it lately. Like lately being, relative, I guess. It's been about 3 weeks since I streamed anything. But I'm fairly familiar with the game and how it operates, so I don't need a lot of automation. One thing I do need help though is that I need help with colony stock levels in this game. I don't recall, even though the game in Distant Worlds universe was a bit more complicated. I do mean complicated. It wasn't just complex; it was complicated. Um, Even though it's much less complicated, I just couldn't for the life of me figure out how to balance the stock levels. So I just put that on automated, and I've not had any problems since then. So I would recommend that, especially super duper, especially for a new player. You go ahead and you automate the colony stock levels. But honestly, you'd be fine just putting everything else to suggested, and manual. Um, and you could easily play the game as a new player that way. Um, and you would probably, like in Stellaris, you have to eventually put governors in charge of things. As your empire grows, that's when you start putting things into colonization. When you've got 30 planets to colonize, you could spend, 2 hours of your real life on pause trying to sort out what colonies to give, and how many ships to send to each one. And you know what? The AI does a great job of that. So once you get to the stage of the game where you've got so many options, you feel inundated, turn on the automation. It does do a pretty good job. It doesn't do a good job though in the beginning. Is my opinion, and that's just should be expected. Um, Somehow though, I always feel like if I put my things into automation, the actual AI, does better than I could manually or with automation on. So maybe there is some kind of difference in the scripting. I'm not sure, but just kind of tossing that out there. All right, so that's really the only thing I've really think is important here is that you've got a very robust options here. Maybe the only other thing that I would tell you need to like set away from default would be again stock levels, but this one is tied to the other one, so this should be, if you put that on automated like I recommended, that'll be automatically updated. Construction is that everything's manually controlled, with that other setting. Um, so you really want to make sure that your military ships are manually controlled, but your other state ships are not. What are other state ships? Well, those are things like explorers and constructors. Um, I'll be honest, there's really not a reason to have those ships be manual. If you need to do something manual with them, you can just go to your fleet planner here, grab them from the list, and tell it to do something. They'll respect your commands. You're not locked out of telling anyone anything actually by putting it onto automated, which is nice. I know other games that have a little automation in them. Your options are I control it all, or it's automated and I'm locked out of controlling it. Um, Not so in this game. You can just grab an automated, explorer that happens to be the closest one to whatever you want to manually explore, and you can tell it to explore, and it'll it'll do that for you, and stay manually controlled until you release it back to the AI. Anyway, you do want to make sure that the more civilian state ships are, in other words, the constructors and the explorers, that they're automated, because even at the very beginning of the game, there's so many things to explore, so many things to build. It's just best that they kind of do their own thing, and with your permission. All right, so that's looking at that here. Let's go ahead and let's look at the text first, actually. So the tech tree has been really reworked, um, and you can see it's really zoomed in here. You now have a queue that you can see pretty easily, which is nice. And if you hold down Control on your mouse wheel, you can zoom in and out. It is one screen now, which I really don't like. Um, I teach, I'm a professor of communication, and there are some things in visual aids and just like flow of communication that this particular tech tree does wrong. The biggest, most egregious offender here is this. So if I want to create a boarding party, I can research this stuff, start shipboard Marines, um, and to get something else related to boarding, I've got to go to a totally different thing. Look how long this line is. Dude, just through all this stuff. All these things here. Oh my goodness. It just keeps going on forever. And then finally I get just upgraded assault pods. So if I were trying to do something straightforward, like upgrade my ship pods, I would be blocked from doing that because I need to research a tech that's way up here. And there's another huge line here. Um, they could have addressed this. I don't know why it's set up this way. Flowcharts in general sometimes can get hard to read, especially when you're trying to make a complex game. I understand. I am not unsympathetic. But there's truly little reason why this has to be this way. Why can't the fighters and assault pods, this part of the tree here, why can't that be up by the troops? Like, why? Like, why isn't it right here? Like, why isn't it right there? Why do we have reactors and a bunch of other stuff? And that's the other thing too, is that we have a weapons section like up here. That's a nice solid contiguous weapons section, and then all of a sudden we have another like little band of weapons right here. Um, I get the idea that this is like a totally novel, unique way of doing the point deflection, I guess, and I'm going to build those this playthrough, actually. I'm curious what they are. I've done the lasers, I've done the rapid fire, I've done the missiles during the preview periods and on my streams during the preview period. This is actually the only PD thing I haven't done yet, point defense I haven't built yet. So I'm going to be doing that. But, why? Why is this here? Why why couldn't we just move this whole thing, this chunk, all the way back up to where weapons are? It does kind of make sense that you would have armor, following weapons. Um, so just why? But for this kind of game, this is a very normal chart, except for those like weird decisions to put things in weird places that create that really unreadable, um, you know, hyper. They could make it hypertextual as well, just basically saying that it does have a tooltip. Maybe if the tooltip was just a little bit more explicit, like it does tell us with this assault pod thing, that we have to research shipboard Marines. Why can't they just make it so that I can just move my mouse over here and click that link and then go right to the tech? Um, so I don't know. Like I said, there's just so this is a design choice here that kind of baffling. And it sounds like I'm ripping the game right now, but this is just a small complaint, very small. Um, it's just it offends me in particular as someone who teaches presentational communication. Uh, this would this would not this would probably get a solid C. um, in a department where a C means you have to retake the course. So, um, um, but in any case, it's a small complaint, just very nitpicky. But at least do be aware as a player that, as you're going through this, especially, can you imagine if this was obscured to you, right? Like that option that obscures it. Oh, trying to figure out where things belonged on the tree would probably drive you crazy. And that's one reason why I think I didn't like the randomized thing, was because we have these branching paths that are not immediately obvious. And they can branch for quite a while in both a literal and metaphorical way. And therefore it's more difficult to do it. Sword of the Stars did it right with their tech tree. And this isn't that bad, but yeah, yeah. Anyway, let's go ahead and look at. So I queued up some tech here. You always want to get your warp field up, of course, and then of course some defenses for your ships and some weapons. I have a certain strategy I like to use in Distant Worlds universe, and it's been okay in this game as well. You get the close-in weapons where your ships can go brawling. This negates the standoff nature of missiles because your ships are right there. And generally your PD can pop the missile as it is like coming out of the tube. Like it doesn't like immediately go into guidance mode. It just kind of pops out straight and then starts to guide its way around. If you're right next to the enemy ship shooting at it, you're able to pop the missile a lot of times before it gets guidance and starts to actually track your ship. So that's my rationale for that. And anyway, so if we could disable their ship with ion and then just kind of shred them with some close-in weapons that do good damage, we're in good shape. Okay, so that's just the idea behind those initial picks anyway. Okay, and then let's look at the ship design window, which has been totally redone as well. Totally redone. And this is maybe a controversial change from the original game, because in the original game you just had a maximum ship size that you could build, and you could just do whatever you wanted, more or less, within that ship size. Now you did have to give it a class, which would tell the shipboard AI what that ship is supposed to do. So you could put a survey module on a escort ship, but if you labeled it an escort ship, the AI would not treat it as one. So that was the problem, or niggle, not really a problem, but that was how the other game worked, is that you gave the ship a job, and then you could just make it the maximum size that you were allowed, and you could mix and match mission types. In this game, you cannot really do that. You can with some finagling, and I'll probably show that later in the next video, next stream, how you might do that. It's more finagly than in the original game, which again, other people are kind of pointing out. It's not that much of a hassle. I just think most people's frustrations are around the idea that it's different and requires more clicks, and they're not entirely obvious clicks at that. Anyway, so this is our ship screen. I've already made changes to these. What I really should have done, maybe we can go to all designs here. I obsoleted a few. If we were going to go ahead and look at them, let's just compare the construction ships here for a second. So if we look at this ship, we've got fairly decent stuff. It's got solar panels for some reason. Now again, ships, energy collectors only activate when the ship is in static mode. So being a ship that's supposed to always be busy, this is just basically carrying around weight and costing us silicon, in my opinion. If you, for whatever reason, have a bunch of ships that you expect to be idle, maybe you can put energy collectors on them, but whatever. So this is a little inefficiency here. And then they have missiles on this. No, and then proximity sensor arrays. Now those are for things like predicting enemy hyper jumps and giving it a bit of extra vision. Again, this is a civilian ship. It doesn't need weapons. It doesn't need sensor arrays. It just needs the minimum it takes to do its job. And let's look at its stats here. It's 42 cruise, 47 sprint, and fuel range 223k. Not really great stuff. Now, if we just go to how we would design it, my design. So let's go back to latest, just active buildable designs. Let's look at the one that I made. And let's see what it can do. It's got a range of 349k, and its cruise and sprint are very similar, if not the same. But I stripped out the weapons, I stripped out the sensor, I gave it an extra cargo bay, I believe, which will help it keep materials going, so it can go from job to job instead of going from job to station, it can go from job to job to job, and then maybe back to the station. And then, of course, a bunch of fuel cells here to keep it going. It does need more crew. I always kind of check that. This is the other thing. Oh, that's the other thing that's actually, I think, is a plus about this design system, though, is that in Distant Worlds Universe, you had like 2 things you needed for, the crew, which was habitat and life support. Very immersive. Not really judging that as a design decision. Made the game very flavorful. At the end of the day, though, it was just extra stuff to put on your ship and to mess around with, and so they've simplified that with just crew systems. And so throughout the game, you'll notice things like that. Is that they've kind of made things that were used to be 2, 2 parts are now just one part. And that's I think that's a good way to simplify things. They didn't dumb it down in terms of the depths of strategy that you can do. In fact, I think they deepened it, and I'll explain that in a second. But they did do some actual streamlining that actually does make the same things just easier to do. And this is a great example of the cruise systems versus the life and hab modules. Is a great example of that. Okay, moving on. Basic fuel cells. What was I going to say here? Okay, so yeah, this is the mission here, or the design type. So they have design bays. Okay, so you basically get certain hard points and a certain number of internal points per hull type. And as you research, you unlock larger hulls that have more bays in them. Excuse me, I'm kind of yawning. Oh, see, I'm not going to edit this out, so I'll just have to deal with my tiredness. So, restrictions kind of help the game, I think. And this might be a controversial opinion, because again, we had this game where you had just had a ship size, and you told it what AI to hook up to it, and then you could just put whatever you wanted on there. As long as it didn't go above that maximum ship size, you could do it. You could have different missions and different things. But with this game, you can't. They've put these bays in here, and they limit what you can do. So again, this is the limit size 50. As we go along in the game, some of these components here will be larger than 50, perhaps, which means that this whole type absolutely cannot handle it at all, period. So that's a limitation. The fact that I'm limited in the number of parts I can put on in addition to the size of the ship. Here's the size indicator. It's 461 out of 475. Those things are, they're going to make a big difference in how you design your ships. Okay, so we don't need to edit that thing, but I did want to show that off. So it is worth redoing all of the ships, all of them, all the bases, all the ships. They all have weapons and proximity sensors and non-mission critical things like energy collectors. Again, you don't need, if you expect your ship to be moving a lot, you don't need energy collectors on them, because they only turn on to save you fuel when it is stopped. It is not a persistent passive thing. And if it is, then it's not obvious that it is, because on ships that I've left them on and on ships that I've not left them on, they seem to refuel just as much after paying very close attention to them. So, in any case, there's some inefficiencies there. One thing that you should know, because this is a commonly asked question, is okay, let's say we want to use these mining bases as fuel points, and that's very normal. And what do I put on there? Do I put basic fuel cells in there, because it's fuel that I'm trying to get into my ships? Or should I put cargo bay, because the fuel, like gasoline, it's called Caslon. At least that's one of the fuels. The beginning fuel is called Caslon. Is also a commodity type, and that commodities go in cargo bays. So if I want to make this a fuel depot as well as a mining base, which one should I use predominantly? And this is true for all stations. The answer is cargo bays. People will get fuel from cargo bays. So you only ever need the one fuel cell type to satisfy the build restriction. So if I don't have one fuel storage, it tells me I need it. You only need the one. Because this is a station, it will be idle all the time, and there's no weapons to power, so we don't really need ammunition in the form of a stored up power in the fuel cell. So, just you can slap an energy collector on one of your pieces. It the energy collection rate is 50, static energy used is 44, so it can just do its thing. And the energy collector will satisfy our needs. Don't even need the space reactor, except it would. Excuse me again. It would fail our design. um, so in any case, there we go. That's a tip there about stations and energy collectors, and also if you want something to be like also a fuel dump, because these will be all over the galaxy, right? And you do want them to have fuel in them for things. So good. We've talked about that. I think we're good to go. Let's go ahead and actually play the game.